Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Tavern Adjacent. Today, on the solo pod, after a couple weeks of break, we are going to be talking about Matt Colville's Flee Immortals, MCDM's latest release that has blown me away over the past year of pre-release. It's finally out, fully, and I need to talk about this. I need to tell you of the glory of this book, so that all of you may know the true salvation that, in my opinion, has made the Monster Manual completely irrelevant. After that, we're going to be talking about another awesome D&D release. Baldur's Gate 3 is out to critical acclaim, but what about what I think about the game? I mean, what I think is not going to be exactly surprising, but, I'm going to share it anyway. And then finally, at the end of the video, we're going to be starting a new end segment, my campaign diary, my third full homebrew campaign has started, and while I may not be publishing it for viewership, I will be talking about it a lot because I think there's some interesting lessons to learn from running something like this, and I hope I can convey those lessons to you as I'm learning those same lessons myself. Without further ado, let's get started. Flee Immortals. Oh my god. If you've been on this channel for the past year, you would have heard me speak about Flee Immortals. I pre-ordered this book when it was originally announced because I had gotten Matt Colville's Kingdoms and Warfare, and while that book definitely doesn't fall within the campaigns that I run, I did see how good it was. It was really well-written material. Even if it's not material that I, as a dungeon master, will use in my games. So, when Matt Colville announced a monster manual, which is one of my top complaints about D&D, I do not like the monsters in base Dungeons & Dragons. I think that they are boring a lot of the time. They are normally just bags of hit points with multi-attack, and that is it. Rarely do their additional abilities come into play, and rarely do those effects force the players to think differently about the encounters. They always are just hitting the monster and then getting hit with multi-attack. That's it. So, I was so hyped for Matt Colville to revamp these monsters because that's what this monster manual was announced as, a revamp to the base D&D monster manual. My problem with a lot of third-party monster manuals, on the other hand, was that a lot of third-party monster manuals focus on making a lot of unique and, sort of novel creatures, and that's not bad. Novelty is good, especially in a game in your imagination. It's cool to have novel, unique, new ideas. However, they come into play a lot less in my campaigns. Something like a pink wonder cat is not going to be used as often as a zombie or a ghost stat block, right? Like, those are going to come into play way, way more often than something that's more niche, that I would almost need to base an entire campaign setting around. You know what I mean? That's my problem with a lot of third-party monster manuals. This book, Flee Immortals, was setting out to address both of these, and by God, that first pre-release, I was impressed. We got a preview, basically, with goblins, some unique light lion creatures, a revamp, MCDM's basically version of a beholder, and I was already impressed at a baseline. I saw the strength of these early mechanics. The main mechanic that interested me initially was the minion mechanic. Minions are one hit point mobs. If they succeed a saving throw, then we deal with, the full bag of hit points. But if they get hit by an attack or they fail in the saving throw, they only have one hit point. They basically die instantly. That allows you to throw tons of these things at your players. The fantasy of cutting down tons and tons of enemies, Mines of Moria, Lord of the Rings style, with Aragorn slicing his way through orcs. Kind of hard to replicate that in D&D when a lot of enemies have 50 plus hit points and die in a couple hits. And it's really hard to do compelling trash if they're all beefy. There's nothing worse than hitting a monster going, all right, I deal 30 damage, and the dungeon master goes, okay. For a trash mob, like for a boss or something a bit more beefy, I think that's okay. But for trash, that's just so freaking annoying. So being able to throw just a ton of one hit point monsters at the players, I like that. Additionally, these one hit point monsters have group attacks. So the dungeon master doesn't need to roll 20 attacks for 20 different orcs. 5 of those orcs are going to swarm your players, and then you just roll 1 attack for the 5, and 1 attack for this 5, and 1 attack for this 5. It's great. And the more orcs are attacking you, the worse the effects become, the worse the damage becomes. It stacks up a lot. These minions can't do basically anything individually, but as a group, I mean, 20 zombies is going to put the hurting on you, no matter what level you're at, because if minions manage to hit you with their attacks, which if there's a bunch of them clumping on you is really, really easy for them to do, you get status conditions, you know? For example, there's the Knoll Mage Gorger that makes it so that you have disadvantage on any concentration checks. That is really cool. Stuff like zombies that reduce your movement speed. Stuff like hellhounds that do fire damage over time. These are effects that stack up. The minions aren't doing a lot of direct damage, but combine these with some other beefier mobs, and then you have a really dynamic fight. These minions aren't doing a lot to you right now, but if you let them keep on stacking up on you, those status conditions are going to build up, and you are going to be in big, big trouble. I love that as a mechanic. It forces you to not just focus on the big boys. It forces you to also focus on the little guys, because if you ignore them, they're going to stack. I like this as a mechanic. It is something that base D&D greatly lacks, because normally when DMs throw weak targets at the player characters, they're so weak that they're irrelevant. But Matt Colville takes such a genius approach with this. His team takes such a genius approach with this, because now the minions, they're not just doing damage. You know, if you deal too much damage to the players, they're just going to die. They're dealing status conditions effect instead, which weakens them for other targets. I love, love, love that. And that's just one mechanic this book introduces. Look how long I talked about that one mechanic and how good it is. That's just one of the many mechanics this book introduces. That first release blew me out of the water. And as I used these stat blocks in my campaign, I started integrating them in more and more and more. And my players are really into it. They were really enjoying themselves, because no longer were they just hitting the bad guys. Now they were strategizing. Now they were thinking. They were coming up with strategies, speccing specific spells in order to deal with minions, speccing specific spells in order to counter certain abilities that they know monsters have access to, focusing more on movement, because fights with Matt Colville's monsters, they rely a lot more on moving players around. So speccing into movement as a player character is a lot more beneficial. You know, they started planning, thinking, and I can tell that they were having so much more fun. Like, throughout combat, when it wasn't their turn, I could see players using the ruler function on my virtual tabletop to draw lines and to figure out like how to line up monsters in a certain way so they would get hit by the most amount of damage from their spells and stuff. It was brilliant. I could see how much more my players were engaged. I could literally see how much more my players were engaged, because they were literally drawing on the map, trying to figure out how to perfectly maximize their plans. It was so cool. This book was working. As the book kept on releasing, they kept on revamping, you know, classics. You got your owl bears, you got your basilisks, your mimics, all the favorites that you want. And monsters that they couldn't do, they were copyrighted or whatever, they revamped in other ways. Illithids became like Olitheks, which are essentially Illithids, but just kind of different. So you could totally just reskin them back to Illithids if you wanted to. I thought this approach was really cool. Also, hey, if you want to use the new revamp version with the new lore, that's awesome as well. Matt Colville also introduced new monsters to our game, such as the Lame Sombra, a creepy, crawly cave predator. I love stuff like this. Or tons of new big plant monsters, like the dancing flower, which has these little petals that it uses as shields to block player characters' damage. It's a really neat mechanic. If they don't, take care of those petals, this dancing lady flower is going to hit you with a lot more damage. So you've got to mitigate these additional flowers that spawns in. I really like that as a mechanic. As you can tell, this book makes monsters so much more dynamic, giving them access to more abilities. But it's not just the base monsters. It's not just your trash. It's not just your big boys. It's also your biggest of boys, your big villains. The villains, the bosses of this book, they're excellent. So often, I'll see campaigns saying, oh, the boss of this campaign is a white. Okay, the white stat block is, it's all right, but it's not a boss. To me, when I'm thinking boss, I'm thinking Oryx in King's Fall. I'm thinking Arthas the Lich King. And, obviously at a lower level, you're not going to be doing anything like that. But, seriously, a white just does a couple things and that's it. How dynamic is that fight going to be? Well, Matt Colville's got a solution. Whether it be low-level bosses, high-level bosses, they have access to the villain action system and a set of layer actions as well. But, that's base D&D. He adds more layer actions to the game, which is really cool since I think that's an underutilized mechanic. But anyway, he also adds in, or his team also adds in, villain actions. These are revamped legendary actions. Now, legendary actions base D&D, they're all right. They're okay. Basically, your villain has access to three legendary actions, and they could use those charges to do specific things, like cast a cantrip or just move. This is not enough for me. And, this mechanic isn't even used that often. You only really see legendary actions applied to high-level creatures. Well, MCDM, they take this mechanic and revamp it and apply it to low-level bosses and high-level bosses. Villain actions, there's no charges or anything like that. You have 3 villain actions, and you can use 1 per round as a boss. That's it. However, they have a lot more effects. At lower levels, it's going to be stuff like commanding their minions to move and make an attack, or commanding their minions to focus on one target and all make attacks against them. I love stuff like this. It adds mechanics into the fight because, okay, that this villain is a boss. They rely on their minions. They're not a solo monster, right? So that means if you take out their minions first, they're not going to be able to do much with their villain actions in the first place. So again, it gives your players priorities to focus on in battle. I like that. But when you start getting to the higher levels, these villain actions just become straight up epic. All right, stuff like a flaming drake that coats itself in liquid magma, solidifying it into this hard carapace that the players need to break through, giving the dragon 100 temporary hit points. And whenever the players deal damage, they need to make a save if they're in melee range, as the lava splatters all over them, dealing additional fire damage. It is awesome, and each of them have access to 3 of these awesome abilities that make the fight so much more dynamic. Seriously, look, dragons just using their legendary actions to fly. Okay, cool. They beat their wings and go up. Neat. Dragons using their villain actions to do a frost cataclysm, flying into the air and crashing to the ground like a meteor, creating a huge hurricane around them. Oh, see, that's what I'm talking about right there. Come on, that is so much cooler. And it makes the fight, again, more dynamic as it changes over time. My biggest beef with D&D bosses isn't just the fact that they seem to be only given epic stuff at higher levels, but my biggest beef is the fact that they don't evolve, they don't change. It's not like by round 3 there's some new unlock. The dragon is always the dragon, they always have fire breath, they always have their claws, their tail, their wing. Nothing changes, nothing shifts, right? But the MCDM dragons, the MCDM bosses in general, they shift, they change over the course of the battle, unlocking new stuff over time and showcasing new abilities. I love this! It is brilliant. So, in comparison to the Monster Manual, this book has so much more content. It's also beautifully illustrated. I love the style that MCDM goes for every single one of their books, and their Arcadum magazine, which unfortunately came to an end recently. The style is very, I don't know how to describe it. I don't know why, but it reminds me, every monster looks like they're on the cover of a rock band album. I don't really know how else to describe it. It's just, the style is epic. That word is really overused, but I don't have another word for it. It's epic. I love the look of all of their works, and this is no different. There are some lackluster illustrations when you get to the new stuff. There are these metal construct creations that look kind of like Thomas the Tank Engine, but, it's okay. A couple duds in a book of bangers is not something I'm worried about. Other than that, my other criticism would be, I will say the MCDM Devils are kind of disappointing. The Devils, they're all right. The Devils are one of the factions of the book. We're going to talk about factions in a moment because they're another brilliant thing this book does because it just does everything brilliantly. But Devils, as a faction, they don't have access to any, wow abilities, at least from what I've used and what I've seen. They utilize a lot of charm effects, which makes sense, but for me, charm never really knocks my players out, so to speak. I'm not talking about, literally reducing them to 0 hit points. The players are rarely shocked when I'm like, okay, you're charmed. It's not very scary to them. I don't know, maybe that's just my players. But the Devils, again, when you compare them to the demons, that's where things get really obvious that I don't know. I don't think there was any favoritism going on, but at least to me, it's obvious that one is better than the other. Demons have access to a soul mechanic. Basically, if a demon reduces you to 0 hit points and you fail a super low DC wisdom save, you die. That's it. Game over. You die as the demon sucks your soul out and uses it as fuel for super powerful abilities like corrupt healing, allowing a demon to block healing magic and use it to deal damage to players. My god, that's brutal. Demons usually have access to the souls at the beginning of the round. Like, when a demon enters combat, they have access to a certain number of souls. You roll a d4, you see how many souls they have, and that's basically how many charges they have to use these ultra powerful abilities. But if they get a chance to kill characters, they get those souls back, and they get to use those ultra powerful abilities more. And it's kind of like a spiraling, rolling ball. Now, of course, the book does warn that insta-kill effects like this, you should be careful. But I don't think you need to be too careful. I tossed my players in against a demon, and I told them, I basically illustrated the mechanic. When they approached the demon, they saw the demon sucking the soul out of an unconscious body and killing it. And that's when they realized, if we go unconscious in this fight, that could be it. They thought they just died at 0 hit points. They didn't know there was a wisdom save associated. The DC is 10, by the way, so it's not too hard to succeed at. But the point is, in that fight, my players were playing so much more cautiously as they changed the way they play. This illustrates another strength of this book. A lot of these monster factions and a lot of these different beasts, they're going to change the way your players approach a situation. If players see, this thing can knock us out if we hit 0 hit points, they're not going to be so casual about hitting 0 hit points, right? They're going to try to keep people up as much as possible to avoid making that doomed wisdom save, right? Another example would be the MCDM Lich stat block, which moves players with a lightning attack that can push them away. If they are playing on a map with edges, where you can fall and drop, then you're going to be playing with a lot more movement-based stuff. The players are going to be trying to avoid those edges so they don't get pushed off by the Lich's lightning attack. This is a mechanic of the final boss of my second campaign where they were fighting Vecna, and they wanted to avoid the edge of the map because they knew Vecna had access to an ability that can shove them right off a ledge, right? Lots of those movement-based abilities that make your players think differently. I love this. Now back to monster factions for a second. Let's talk about the good aspects of it. Yeah, devils are a bit disappointing because they don't have access to super uber cool soul abilities like the demons. But though devils may be a dud faction, a lot of the factions are not duds. MCDM doesn't just have a human stat block or a orc or a goblin like the monster manual. No. There are multiple different classes of each faction. So for example, there is a goblin assassin, a goblin brute, a goblin soldier, each of which have access to different abilities and all of which synergize together. Goblins have access to a unique trait, unique to goblins. For goblins, it's that they can't take attacks of opportunity. They can just run away doing hit and run type stuff on your player characters. And all of the goblin stat blocks are based on this hit and run playstyle. Humans 3 times per day can choose to gain advantage on an attack that they make against a player character. And a lot of their mechanics rely on getting advantage on an attack. When you have advantage on an attack, the arrow from the trick shot will bounce to another player character. This is really neat. I love it when stat blocks synergize like this, not just with mechanics within the stat blocks, but with mechanics in other stat blocks. I love this so much. Can't exaggerate enough. It's also really cool just to have access to so many different stat blocks for humanoid factions. This is a huge criticism I have of base monster manual. You have your bandit and your bandit captain, but that's it. Here, now you have 30 plus stat blocks could be bandits. You have tons of different kobolds, tons of different humans, tons of different orcs, tons of different bugbears, tons of different lizard folk. It's great. I love it. It's so good. I could say that over and over and over again. I just hope that you get it. I need people to support this book. Final mechanic that I'm going to talk about. We've talked about, there's two more things. First thing is the environments. This is where a lot of the novel creatures come in. I said that MCDM wasn't focused on making novelty here, but, come on, what would a book be without a little bit of novelty? There is novelty in the environment-based monsters. You have your baseline monsters. They're mostly revamps of what we already have, stuff like your mimics, your owlbears, your orcs, stuff like that. But then you move on to environments. That's when they are really tossing in their unique ideas, their crazy out-of-the-way stuff, like that dancing lady flower thing I mentioned earlier. Each monster is made to fit in a certain environment, like a cave, or a graveyard, or a fey forest. And again, I like this. Now, I will say, I rarely actually use the monsters in those conditions, in those environments. I'm usually trying to apply them to other things. However, even if that is the case, I will say that it's really easy to reskin these creatures. Additionally, it's really easy to mix and match their abilities in a lot of ways. Like, for example, going back to the minions from earlier, I mean, remember I said how minions have different status effects? I mean, heck, that Knoll Mage Gorger I brought up, who's to say that ability couldn't be slotted onto a zombie? I mean, why not? It's really easy to mix and match these creatures, despite environments, despite stat blocks, which, again, a real big strength of this book. Now, the final mechanic, a mechanic I did not know about until I got the full version. A mechanic only contained in the full version of the book. Evil player character parties. Villain parties. I love this. In my first D&D session of this new campaign, I ran an evil D&D party. Well, they weren't evil. They were just rivals. They weren't bad guys necessarily. But, God, this mechanic is cool. Essentially, 5 stat blocks for 5 different evil party members. They're not necessarily player characters. So often, when people try to pull this off, they'll make whole player characters serve as the evil party members. But I think that's a dumb idea because there's so much mechanics that are included in a player character that a DM doesn't need to run a monster. Here, cut all that crap out. It's just a monster stat block. And they're not player characters necessarily. They're unique. They're different, you know? That goes for basically the entire book. They minimize the amount of player character material that's given to the monsters. So monsters aren't casting firebolt, they're casting unique spells that are all their own. I love that mechanic as well. But back to the evil player characters. Each is perfectly balanced to the level they recommend. I ran the level 3 evil party for 5 level 3 characters, and it was a super balanced fight. It was close, it was down to the wire, even though I was missing a lot of attacks. The player characters did manage to eke out the victory, and it was a great, great fight. Each player character acts like a faction enemy, basically, where the evil players, they all synergize together in certain ways. They also have access to their own villainous party actions, allowing them to do additional effects at the top of the round. This mechanic is so good. I used it once and I'm in love with it. In D&D, mirror matches are so much fun, but they're underutilized because, again, the monster manual does not cater to it. But this one does. It gives you access to evil parties with their own lore, their own personalities, brilliant art to represent all of them, 5 different stat blocks for each. And hell, if you want to just use these evil individual adventures, you can do that too, since each of them have their own individual stat block and challenge rating that work perfectly fine on their own. Guys, this is the greatest monster manual ever released, bar none. There is no competition. In my opinion, if a monster manual does not reach this level of care, depth, I don't care about it, really. I mean, I can feel the love that the creators of this book put in. I mean, seriously, every art piece, every stat block, it just oozes of people who give a crap. You know, who put in the effort to make something truly incredible. And they succeeded with flying colors. This book was awesome from pitch, and it was awesome at release. I recommend this to everyone. This is the best $40 I have ever spent. I've gotten a whole year of content out of this book, and I don't see it stopping anytime soon. This book is so awesome. Now, does it make the monster manual completely irrelevant? Not really. It doesn't cover every monster. But I may or may not be workshopping a little project of my own. I have, for the past few months, been working on action-oriented MCDM-style versions of monsters from the Monster Manual that aren't covered in Flea Mortals myself. And I'm certainly not MCDM. I'm one moron who barely knows anything about game design. But I happen to be having a lot of fun because this book, just by using it, I feel like I've become a better dungeon master. My games have become so much more fun. And now I'm creating monsters, which I've never done before. I credit this book for all of that. This is the greatest D&D book I've ever bought. Bar none. It's the most useful D&D book I have. I'm planning on buying it again just so I have the physical copy of it. I have it on digital right now, so I need to get it again just so I can have the hardcover. That's how good this book is. And I'm the kind of guy that saves money all the time. Get this book, please. I promise you it will be worth it. It is such a good monster manual. My God. MCDM, standing ovation. You have won the whatever, the D&D book of the year or something. I don't know. All I know is this is awesome. Go buy it. All right. I think people are expecting me to also say that about Baldur's Gate, which I am, but with a little bit of extra thrown in there too. So yeah, without further ado, guys, let's get started with Baldur's Gate 2. Well, I mean Baldur's Gate like 2 TOO. It's Baldur's Gate 3. Go hit the tape. To the shock of absolutely nobody, I think Baldur's Gate is a really, really good game. I will say that I don't see myself getting super into it. Now, it's not because I think it's like okay or whatever. I still think it's a great game. I was really impressed with the first few hours. I've gotten through 3 hours of the game so far. You know, I escaped the ship, got to the Enclave, I've been fighting some goblins, I'm meeting my companions. I'm really impressed with a few things. Number one, voice work. There's a lot of voice acting in this game. I was actually surprised that the player character isn't fully voice acted, but at the same time, like, I feel like that would add, you know, another bajillion hours of dialogue in the game, so I get it. But every single NPC has a lot of voice interactions, and I really like that. The animation work is also really, really, really strong. Larian did a great job at making everyone, you know, emote and stuff, and I feel like we kind of take that for granted. I mean, Mass Effect Andromeda showed us very distinctly how rough things can get when you're not emoting properly. It gets really inhuman, really uncanny valley, really awkward. But all of these characters feel like people, and I really, really like that. The combat is great. It feels like Dungeons & Dragons. I mean, you're not playing D&D, you're not rolling dice and stuff, but, you know, attacks have a chance to miss and hit and stuff. You have a variety of abilities that you can use even if you're a melee character, which is something that maybe the next edition of D&D can take some inspiration from. Who knows? I really like that. Character creation is strong. I was surprised with the limited amount of faces available for characters, which, yeah, a little disappointing. I was surprised that we were stuck with the presets. I was expecting something like ESO style where you could like shape your face and stuff, but honestly, even with, you know, the limited facial features, I was happy with the way my character came out. I made Kalia Solfero, and the reason I didn't make my changeling rogue is because there are no changelings, and I feel like Tiefling is stretching it a little bit thin, but yeah, Kalia Solfero is the character I made. She's a rogue, and I'm having a lot of fun playing her. I really like the character work for the main character and all the other characters. It's fun being able to talk to these people. I mean, your party is actually fleshed out and stuff. You can take a lot of good inspiration from Baldur's Gate. The way this adventure starts is really, really great. I like the way how it links the primary character, your character, to the other characters in the party through the Illithid infection. I love that a lot. The presentation is really, really strong. The gameplay is good. The reason I can't see myself playing it that often is because I'm a really busy guy. I often play video games in like bursts, and I only really get super into something if I'm extremely invested in gameplay and story. And I am a lover of action-based gameplay, like, you know, God of War, Dark Souls, Ghost of Tsushima, stuff like that. Turn-based is not really my thing. When I'm playing a game, it's more than just the universe, the story, all that. It is the moment-to-moment gameplay, and turn-based is not usually my jam. You know, in D&D, it's a bit different because I'm bouncing off of other human beings. Here, that element is lacking. It's just turn-based combat, and that's less my thing. Do I dislike it? No. I think this is really strong turn-based combat. Really well done. I mean, I like the combat of D&D, so I'm probably going to like the combat of this because it's the combat of D&D in video game form. So I do like it. It's just not as investing as other games, and as a guy who, again, is really busy, I can only afford to really play games for a couple hours at a time, and Baldur's Gate, I feel like I need to play for extended sessions past that in order to really, like, satisfy my cravings to progress the story. Whereas if I'm playing something like Apex Legends, I can play for an hour and be satisfied with what I've done in that hour-long time, right? Now, again, not to say that I dislike Baldur's Gate. I don't. I really like this game. I just right now am not viscerally enchanted by it yet. I feel like as I get past like this opening segment, as I get more hours into the game, I feel like I'm going to get more into the gameplay, more into the story. When I get invested in the world, in the gameplay, in the story, that's when things really start to pick up. That's when things really start to invest me and to make me want to play this game more and more and more. But right now, I'm taking this game at a really casual, very lighthearted pace. I'm not grinding it out, It's not like when Tears of the Kingdom released and I played that thing for like 7 hours, It's not like God of War Ragnarok. It's not like Ghost of Tsushima. This is a game I'm going to take casually. I'm going to enjoy it for what it is. I think this is a really, really strong entry, but again, I'm not like grinding it out right now. So don't expect me to do some massive spoiler review or a video talking about like the story and stuff, because again, taking it at a casual pace. But yeah, if you want to play D&D as a video game, I mean, like, this is it, man. I mean, it's taken so many elements of Dungeons & Dragons and faithfully imported them in a video game form without weakening the gameplay of the game itself, which is really, really good. So often games try to, like, shoehorn in references to whatever they're based on to the detriment of the game. Baldur's Gate does not do that. It is doing everything in its power to make it feel like D&D, but also feel like a good freaking video game. And it's done both excellently. Man, I'm really impressed. I did not know if I was going to be into this. Like, I knew I would say nice things about it, like, no matter what, because it's a D&D video game, and I knew I'd be impressed based on, like, early demos and stuff. But, like, I'm enjoying myself playing this game, and I feel like I want to play it. Again, I'm not at that point where I want to, like, play for hours and hours and hours and grind out like crazy. That's not where I'm at right now. But I do feel like playing it. I do feel like having a good time. I do feel like this is a game I'm going to play from start to finish. For me, that is more than enough. Baldur's Gate 3 is a very impressive feat of gaming, and for me, that's more than enough. On top of that, like, if you want to play as a player, this is not the same experience, obviously. It's a video game. It is not nearly as open as Dungeons & Dragons, the game in your imagination, obviously. But, I mean, it really faithfully recreates a lot of those feelings I get when I play Dungeons & Dragons, especially as somebody who rarely interacted with promotional materials. I watched the cinematic trailer with the dragons and the Illithid ship, and that's it. I do not know anything about the characters. I don't know anything about the story beyond what I have experienced in the game, and that lack of knowledge is awesome. It feels like I'm experiencing this, like really experiencing it, and I'm having a great, great time with that. So yeah, if you are invested in the D&D universe and you want to experience it in a new format, if you're a DM who wants to experience that life as a player, this is a great place to do it. Now, as far as lessons for Dungeon Masters as to starting an adventure, I already brought up a really strong one. So often, when you are getting a party together, a lot of DMs struggle to connect them. A lot of DMs struggle to make it feel like these people have a reason to work together. Baldur's Gate 3 provides a good example of how to do it right, where all of the player characters, including the actual player character, are infested with this Illithid mind virus worm thing. And obviously, that's very bad for your health. They're all trying to find a cure, therefore, they stick together. I really, really like this. You don't necessarily need to do this exact thing, but your players need a reason to stick together beyond they were hired for the same job. I mean, that's a good one. I do like that as a requirement, but I like giving them more than just that. Like, for example, we're going to talk about the beginning of my current D&D campaign, but in that game, not only are my players all working on the same job, but they are all competing in this competition. They're all competing in something called the Proving. The teams are selected at random, and my players were randomly selected to be together. Fate has brought these people together, and through the Proving, their characters are going to grow closer. That's their reason for staying together, beyond a supernatural reason that may or may not come later in the campaign, right? So yeah, that is a really good lesson that this introduces. I also like how each player character has their own mysteries. Like Shadowheart, a character I really like, by the way. I don't know what it is about her voice, but it's very alluring. I do like speaking to her. But yeah, as a character, Shadowheart is cool. But one reason I really like her is from the framework of her, like as a D&D player character that someone is playing as. I like how she has her own mystery. In fact, all of the player characters have their own secrets that they're keeping from the party. And while not everyone needs this necessarily, I do love this. Again, in my new D&D campaign, I have a player character who is keeping stuff from the party, keeping secrets about his abilities, his connections, his powers. I love that. I feel like Shadowheart's doing the same thing. Like, you immediately see her, holding this powerful relic. I don't know what the heck that thing is as the actual main player character, which obviously in D&D there's not usually a main player character, but this is a video game, different circumstances. But anyway, me as the actual player character, I don't know what that relic is. She's keeping it a secret. And in a D&D game, an actual D&D game with multiple main characters, I could see that being a really strong plot point. I also met this warlock guy. He's got this mission to hunt down a demon lady, and I have a sneaking suspicion that this demon lady is his patron. So, I mean, again, cool mysteries that are building up through the player characters. As a D&D party, I think that this could be a lot of fun. But yeah, those are the two lessons I took immediately from my first few hours of gameplay. Obviously, there's a lot more just beyond that, as you're exploring the Enclave and fighting off these goblin buggers. Lots of fun stuff. But overall, again, very impressive. I think there's going to be a lot of lessons I take away from Baldur's Gate, as I continue playing it. Obviously, it's a video game. It's not a Dungeons & Dragons game, meaning that, the lessons you can take are going to be more, few and far between. But overall, even if you can't learn anything from it, who cares? It's a fun video game, and I'm having a great time. I think Larian Studios totally deserve all of the accolades that they are getting, because this is a great piece of work they've put out. They've said they want to do something smaller scale for their next project, which don't blame them. This is just an insane project to put out there, so I do not blame them for wanting to cut it back next time, because good God, this is very, very impressive. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the after effects of Baldur's Gate. I hope this brings even more people in to experience Dungeons and Dragons. I was laughing my bum off on the gaming subreddit when people were complaining about failing dice rolls, rolling natural ones at the worst possible time, and I was thinking in my head dang, welcome to D&D, man. The game's the game. I just think that this is going to introduce so many new people to the hobby, and I'm looking forward to that. I'm just really impressed with how faithfully it recreates the feel of playing Dungeons & Dragons in the gameplay, even though it's a video game, not a board game. Very, very cool. So yeah, even if, like I said, not a game I'm going to be grinding out, not a game I'm probably going to get addicted to, it's a game I'm having a good time with. And you know what? Sometimes that is enough. Good Lord, there are so many video games I'm going to be playing in the next few months. We've got a new season of Apex out, and we've got Baldur's Gate, and the new Armored Core game is coming out from Software, and oh my God, I'm so excited. Armored Core was my thing in the mid-2000s, so to bring it back, I'm so hyped. But yeah, I mean, I am really looking forward to a lot of game releases. But you know what else I'm looking forward to? I'm looking forward to my new Dungeons & Dragons campaign. I started a new D&D game with my home game party, and I want to talk about it because we just had our first session. We had our session 0, and good Lord. It ties into a lot of what we've already talked about in this video. So yeah, let's wrap it up and talk about my D&D campaign. So, the day I got Baldur's Gate was also the same day I started my new D&D campaign. Also, hey, by the way, you like this variation of the set? Decided to get all cozy because we're going to be telling a story together. Now, we're not really going to be focusing on the story of my D&D campaign because whenever someone tells stories about the lore of their campaign, I can sometimes feel that people fall asleep. So I'm going to try to limit that part, but mostly focus on the mechanics and the lessons taken away. So, for starters, Session 0. Session 0 was awesome. This is the first time I've ever done a group Session 0, where I got everyone together in one room and we all grabbed character sheets and did it. Pencil and paper stuff. I have literally never used a Dungeons & Dragons book for its actual practical use. I have D&D books, but I use them for display purposes almost exclusively. I rarely, if ever, use them to look up rules or to make characters. But this time I was like, what the heck? We're pulling paper character sheets. Let's use a book. And you know what? It was so much fun. It was great. I had a great time. I started playing this game in 2015, roundabout there, and I've always just used online materials. But there is a lot of fun in just sitting around the table doing this stuff together. I've always done session zeros on the call, right? But here, I really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed getting everyone in the same room. And it was kind of a pain, working out the work schedules for, a time that's reasonable. Because usually we play D&D like really late night. But I didn't want to have the session zero at like 9 p.m. So figuring out a time to actually do this, bit of a pain. But when we got to the scheduling pain, it was a great, great time. Afterwards, we got some sushi. Actually, midway through, we got some sushi because we were having so much fun that, making the characters took like 4 hours. But it was totally worth it. Now, a big reason why I usually do this session zero thing, on the phone is because I would prefer to keep the player characters secret from each other. I like the surprise of seeing what characters people have made when the session arrives. However, here doesn't make as much sense because all the player characters, they live in a small village and town. So, they have a pretty good likelihood of knowing each other. So having the players, the actual people, be aware of each other's characters makes a lot of sense. The characters we end up with were Dusk, a soul-sworn bard, soul-sworn being my homebrew vampire race, a woman who has lost her memories and is now striving to be a performer, even through her undead nature, a human barbarian named Shanks, a warrior of the north, a mercenary who fought with his band of merry friends until, unfortunately, losing them in a brutal fight. He eventually arrived in the small village of Himika where he recovered and is now looking to find his lost comrades. We have Ulrich, our Aasimar paladin, a man who has defended Himika for a long time, but is finally taking the next step in his defense of his people and exploring the world around him. We have Tors, an inventor, an arcanist, a artificer from Kerkonos, who built himself a railgun and uses it to hunt bounties. He ended up in Himika, and now he wants to explore this new continent that he's found himself in. And finally, Sylvanas, a satyr warlock who is looking to understand the nature of his patron. Right from the get-go, I was really happy with all these characters. Usually, I'm happy with the characters, but mostly just from like here's the potential kind of thing. I'm not really looking at potential right now because even at base, I'm really happy with all these player characters. Usually, my players don't give me too much in the way of goals, but almost everyone gave me really palpable goals for their characters and origins for their characters, tying them into lore of my world. And not to brag, but I think my homebrew mechanics really helped them with this. If you're unaware, we're actually not playing base D&D 5e. We're playing my Tales from the Tavern revision. I revamped character origins first, and obviously that came into play immediately right here. And it was great. My players were a lot more invested in backgrounds. There was a lot more choices for them to do. Like, instead of just going through and going, oh, this looks cool, they were reading through everything, reading through every little detail. And obviously, like, the guy who wrote everything is standing right there, so maybe they were just doing this to be nice. But, they were really going through every single race option, every single lineage option, every single background in each faction, in each feat that the factions offer. It was great. I love seeing them be overwhelmed with choices. And when they made those choices, it helped them to flesh out their characters and their backstories. I think having mechanics lend to creating story is one of the strongest parts of Dungeons & Dragons. And that's what I was partially trying to do with my system. I gave them more options, not just for like mechanical combat reasons, but also to build lore. And I think it worked out. I think it worked out great, not to brag or anything, right? But yeah. I'm going to be a bit more humble later on, trust me, because I did make mistakes in this session, don't worry. But anyway, the session zero was fun. It was a tad longer than maybe it should have, but hey, we're friends, we're hanging out, we're having a good time, Doesn't matter if you're hanging out with your friends too long, right? But yeah, 2 weeks later, Baldur's Gate releases. I play it for a little bit, but then it's time to stop because I've got a campaign. So I prepped over the course of 3 days, about 6 pages of notes, big blocks of text for descriptions and stuff. I use online material to help me to create descriptions of stuff like trees or villages because I hate writing that stuff. I would rather focus on practical notes for the story and the mechanics of a session rather than like writing out the whimsy-bimsy of like what a tree looks like. I was educated as a reporter, meaning I write very thoroughly to the point. I don't talk like that, but I'm very like succinct when it comes to my writing, which doesn't lend itself to describing fantasy things, right? So I needed some help online from that, but not a big deal. It's plenty of material out there. But The point is, I was happy with getting those descriptions on the notes, because now when somebody enters a village or sees something, I have something to give it a little bit more oomph. I don't need that kind of description for everything, but for big stuff like Himika Village itself, the place where they live, I want that kind of description. I want to go that in depth. The characters themselves, we did their introductions one at a time. So basically what I did was I started with Dusk, our Soulsworn, because she requested she have a roommate. And so I knew she would have somebody to roleplay with immediately. So she wakes up, she roleplays with her roommate, they go into the village, and then they see another player character. That player character meets them, they speak, and then he goes off to do his own task. The artificer, in this case, he needs to calibrate his weapon. He goes to the training range. He sees another player character, the barbarian, wailing away at a dummy. From there, he shoots one of the artificer shoots a dummy. The noise is heard across the village. We cut to another player character. That player character leaves his isolation and sees another player character, etc., etc., etc. Well, not etc., etc. That's it. I just described the whole chain. Basically, we bounce from player character, allowing each of them to make their introductions. I enjoyed the crap out of this. I like seeing them meet each other one at a time, gave them chance to be comfortable with the role-playing, and I was really happy with how much party role-playing there was. We invited a new member to our group. He's playing the warlock in this case, Sylvanus, the satyr, and you know what? Sylvanus, our satyr warlock, he was a lot of fun. And he pushed the party a lot in that in-character role-playing. In fact, in general, everyone got better at in-character role-playing. I like seeing them do it. They're not exactly voice actors or anything, but they definitely don't need to be. I like seeing them do this. It gave me a break, let me sit back, and it let them just build their characters out. Lots of fun. As for the combat itself, I utilized the Flea Mortals evil parties. Now, in this case, it was an evil party. This party was a part of the proving. Basically, my party members, the player characters, they need to prove themselves to the village to become snow striders, which gives them the abilities that they need to traverse the frozen wilderness. So, they need to defeat this rival party as the first trial of the proving to become a snow strider. And it was not an easy fight. Now, I was really happy with how much my party wanted to prep for this. The party wanted to investigate who their rivals would be, who their opponents in this arena match would be. They discovered they to be the Grave Order, a group of pirates that ties into the end of our second campaign, which is a neat little callback for my player characters. But in any case, these pirates gained access to necrotic abilities, and now they have the powers to raise the dead. Here's the essential mechanics of this Flea Mortals fight. The party members, they can raise the dead, summon in minions, essentially. 3 skeletons, 3 zombies, 3 shades, ghosts, whatever. Now, that's what they can do with their action. Some of them, however, can use their bonus action to destroy their summoned minions for effects. So, for example, this one lady, she summons in 3 skeletons, and then using her bonus action, she destroys one of them to heal a fellow party member. That's a pretty powerful effect. Now, this immediately introduces the mechanic to the players. They raise the minions, but you need to destroy the minions, because if the minions stay on the field for too long, they're going to be able to use their bonus actions to gain additional effects, heal themselves, deal more damage, etc., etc., etc. Take care of those minions before they become a problem. And it was really cool to see our party really work through that, using spells like Scorching Ray to quickly down these 1-hit point minions before they become an issue later on in the fight. Each player character didn't really take one opponent like I predicted. They divvied up using their brain to figure out who needed prioritizing, which was good. But because of Flea Mortal's strong mechanics, they can't really just burst down one person in this rival party and call it a day. They need to go from party member to party member, focusing on different targets because each of them are doing their own thing, concentrating on different devastating spells that the party need to interrupt. Overall, this arena match was 5v5, and it was a lot of fun for my players to engage with. I gave them their first magic item, a great sword, which allows them to push enemies. Our barbarian got that great sword. And, you know, it's a pretty cool effect. Though, of course, being able to push enemies 5 feet away isn't exactly like the end of the world for that enemy. It is, at the end of the day, a starter magic item for session 1. You know, things are going to get spicier with the magic items later on. But I'm trying to kick back on the magic items because in Tales from the Tavern, they get access to a lot more abilities. Through my rewrites, they get access to so much more powers from their background and from their race that magic items would just give them even more stuff. So I'm waiting until they level up to give them more palpable magic items. For now, simple magic items instead, mostly roleplay-based magic items, with the exception, of course, of the sword that pushes people. The arena fight went well. The party did win. I do think the fight was a little easier than it should have been because I was missing attacks like crazy. There was a whole round where I just missed like 4 times in a row. And obviously, if they were hitting those attacks, it would have been more down to the wire. But even without hitting those attacks, it was still down to the wire. I mean, multiple player characters were at single-digit hit points. Our Barbarian was even feeling the pressure. And I mean, you know how a frenzied Barbarian is during Rage. They deal a lot of damage and can take a lot of damage, but even he was at 10 hit points left. It was crazy. So yeah, even though I was missing a lot of those attacks, I think maybe it was for the best because even still my party were sweating. But I liked that they were sweating. Even though I was missing attacks, I liked that they were still kind of feeling that pressure. They were playing really well and they were rewarded with a victory. The next session, they need to hunt down an owlbear, and perhaps some other things may interrupt them on the way. Who knows? That'll be the final trial of the Snowstrider proving. I'm really happy with how this session opened up, and my players are as well. It's a very big Lord of the Rings vibe. I gave them an epic prologue before the session to communicate the lore of this world, war against the ancient Oni that originated from the volcano known as the Maw of Demise, and their devil queen, etc., 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 sealed away through unknown means, for not a single soldier survived to tell the tale of the devil's defeat. So yeah, lots of fun stuff. However, when we get to the actual content of the campaign, it's more of a humble, down-to-earth, adventure story. It's not exactly the Shire, they're participating in combat and such, but it isn't the epic tale of the Oni, but my players know, that's going to come into play. There's this sense of unease of when all of this ancient lore is going to factor in the campaign, and I love that. I love, love, love that. So yeah, it's an adventure story. They're going to be going from point A to point B, but right now, we're at point A. We're sticking for point A for the moment, at least. I'm happy with how this first session has gone. In terms of the prep, I was really happy with how I prepped. I got all my notes done pretty well. I got my sound effects uploaded. In terms of how I use the sound effects, really great. I have a lot of SFX in my games. I have magic sounds, combat sounds, monster sounds, etc. And I love using these to just further the immersion of the game. I also added in an ambience folder so that I can take advantage of ambience more throughout the campaign, just a town square, a forest, etc. And this has made the games just so much more immersive, and I think has encouraged my party to engage more in roleplay. Music was so fun to use during that epic big prologue with the Oni War and the First Age and all that. That epic prologue was all synced to music, and it was a lot of fun. Took a little bit of rehearsing, but I had a great time with it. And those 3 minutes really set up the story of the campaign. I think the music was a huge part of doing that. I think that first impression is really, really important. You don't necessarily need to do it the way I do it, but using that music, I was able to catch my players' attention and really get them hooked in. So yeah, that was awesome. I'm really happy with the prep. I'm happy with Flee Mortals and how it was used in this campaign. In terms of my VTT itself, I've been using Foundry happily. I'm just going to come out and say it. I think Roll20 is like the Monster Manual. Its time has long passed by other things that, in my opinion, far outdo it. Foundry being something that, in my, opinion, far outdoes Roll20, dude. This is such a great application. If you haven't tried it out, absolutely do so. I use it all throughout my second D&D campaign. I'm happily using it going into my third. I've added some additional features. The most notable one being animation. I added in a weather mod that adds a lot of animated weather effects into the game, and this is great. I love seeing the clouds move throughout the map and snowfall and all that. It's a lot of fun to use and makes the maps, again, just so much more better looking. Having moving elements I didn't think would be that big of a deal, but it is a big deal. And even though it doesn't take too much time to set up, like 3 minutes at most, it greatly improves some already incredible maps made by Sei and Peiku, whose maps I've been using for like 2 years now. So yeah, great campaign. And I'm looking forward to the future adventures of this party. Now, my camera is screaming at me that it is running out of battery, so I think it's time to wrap this up. It is time for Thing of the Week. Hit the thing. This week, my Thing of the Week is probably one of the greatest pieces of art ever made. My Thing of the Week is The Wire, a show that I remember, my dad was obsessed with, like 2002, 2003 when it was first airing. But, even though it's been like 20 years, I never watched it. Over the past 20 years, I would always, eventually it would come up in conversation and, I would never ever go to watch it. But recently, I don't remember why, I decided, what the heck, like, let's just watch this show. And my God, it is a masterpiece unlike anything I have ever seen. This show is so painfully real, but at the same time, so visceral and engaging. It is about West Baltimore, the drug trade, the game, so to speak. The performances are excellent. The story is excellent. Every line of the dialogue is excellent. The scenes are well shot. The story is engaging. The characters are incredible. I mean, it's incredible how, in a show filled with people that you'd think you would hate, every character becomes your favorite at one scene or another. You like all of them because everyone in The Wire is human. Everyone is so human. That's the only adjective I could use to describe this show. Warts and all. Flaws and all. It's incredible. Like, the fact this never won any awards, it's literally a crime to me. It's horrible. This show is so good. I recommend it to anyone who's got the time. 5 seasons long. Every scene is incredible. Every episode is meaningful. And I gotta say, I am thoroughly impressed. I can't believe I held off on watching the show for so long. But yeah, I can see why my dad was so obsessed with it back in the early and mid-2000s because, dang, this is... wow, incredible. But in any case, I think that's going to finally end off today's episode of Tavern Adjacent. Long episode, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you did, please do leave a like. If you want to see more of our content, then you could check out our RPG horror story series where we cover the best and worst of Dungeons & Dragons and all TTRPGs. You guys showed a lot of love on the most recent episode. Thank you so much for that. The show is linked in the cards, and while you're there, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down in the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment, flee, mortals, to let me know you made it to the end of the video. Unless, like, comment, subscribe, I will see you all next time. Farewell.